Good afternoon and welcome to Viewpoint. In January of 1989, Officer William Lozano shot and killed a black motorcyclist, Clement Lloyd, in Overtown. The incident was followed by a crash in which Alan Blanchard, a passenger on the motorcycle, also died. This led to 3 nights of rioting, arson, and looting throughout Miami. Later that year, a racially mixed Miami jury convicted Lozano, a Colombian immigrant, of 2 counts of manslaughter. A state appeals court overturned that verdict last summer. They stated that jurors were concerned about more riots if Lozano were acquitted and that the trial should have been held elsewhere. Joining us to discuss how our ethnically divided community can reach a better understanding is Monsignor Brian Walsh, who feels the trial should have never been moved from Miami, Reverend Luther Jones, who's concerned about the community that he feels is controlled by fear, Francisco Pinto Torres, president of the Colombian Political Action Committee. He feels that Lozano is a victim of circumstance and deserves a fair trial, Rabbi Solomon Schiff, who believes education is the key to a nonviolent community, and Reverend Julian Jackson of the African American Council of Christian Clergy of South Florida. His group has adopted the motto, "No justice, no peace." Reverend Jackson, let's start by addressing you. No justice, no peace. To some folks, they might interpret that as a threat. What exactly do you mean by that statement?
Well, we believe that in order for us to have peace, there must be justice. We believe that this community has experienced an element of unfairness, especially among the black community, and we believe that there must be peace if we are going to have justice. We believe in the nonviolent movement and the 6 nonviolent movement steps that Dr. Martin Luther King projected. And in fact, we are really saying the same thing he said.
Right.
But we believe that education is a way of getting our community prepared for whatever that we are facing.
Mr. Torres, obviously you don't feel that William Lozano received a fair trial. Why is that?
Because of the passions of the community and how they impinged upon the jury's perception and the jury's decision. I think that the first trial shouldn't have been held here, and I think that the moves by the defense and by the judge.
Why? Why do you feel that it shouldn't have been held here?
Well, because I think jurors in this community would be too influenced by a perceived desire of the black community to obtain a conviction for Lozano.
Okay, I mean, you are an attorney. What does that say about our judicial system if you don't feel that because of the black community that he would have received a fair trial?
I think that without going into too much of technicality, we have to make a big effort, given the modern world, given the fact that communication is instantaneous, given the fact that there is not one juror in existence anywhere that is not going to be soaking up all this information. We have to make an effort to make things fair.
Okay.
We have to make an effort to equalize things.
Right. Rabbi Schiff, you were president of the Community Relations Board, chairman, during the Lozano trial. What is your perception of this issue?
Well, I recall the tension at that time was very great. We of the Community Relations Board did, I think, a good job of educating the community. We had, which was not done in the McDuffie trial some years earlier, where you had even bigger riots, where they didn't have the community was not educated, they didn't know what the trial was about, they didn't see the trial, and what we were able to accomplish with the cooperation with the media was to have the whole trial rebroadcast every night from gavel to gavel. We had attorneys that would explain at the beginning of each segment what they were going to see and explain things, so the people saw that it was a fair trial. And I think that discouraged a lot of people when people say, hey, it was not a fair trial. They say, well, we saw it on television. It seemed fair to us. So educating the community was our main goal, with op-ed articles in the Miami Herald and elsewhere. So we try to educate the community that the trial system, the judicial system is fair, and it promoted a greater respect for the verdict.
Monsignor Walsh, why did you feel the trial should have been moved?
Should not
have been moved, I'm sorry.
For the simple reason that just moving the trial does not necessarily solve any basic problem. it certainly doesn't help this community to grow in maturity. The McDuffie trial was a trial when the policemen who were responsible for the death of McDuffie, they were tried in Tampa. That did cause a riot here in Miami, the major riot, in fact, that got Miami its reputation. And so just moving a trial does not give any guarantee that there won't be a disturbance in Miami. And I think it's just facing up to reality and responsibility as a community. And with rapid communication, as has already been mentioned here, instantaneous communication, holding the people in Orlando or the people in Tallahassee know just as much about these things and are more fearful of Miami than the people who live in Miami.
Reverend Jones, you were chaplain at Jackson Memorial Hospital during this time. You were sort of on the front of the battle that was going on, so to speak, during the riots. What's your perception of this?
Pardon?
What's your perception of this whole situation? Are you fearful?
Well, I have a lot of feeling about the way the community is divided, particularly along ethnic and racial lines. We're afraid of each other. We're being intimidated by each other. And I think we are in the process of all of that, losing sight of what our first objective should be. Our first objective should not be to make certain that everybody's rights are secured. Our first objective should be to find the truth and then, as best we can, apply the truth under the law. Okay. But we can't do that under the present kind of hostage atmosphere that the truth is being held under.
Okay, you had a question, sir.
Yeah, the question I wanted to ask, and it's against the background of 10 years in which at least 3 black men were killed by policemen, all of whom were unarmed at the time, and in the background against none of the policemen have been incarcerated, although those black men seem to be killed time after time. The question I would ask, when you say that the jury or the process was included by fear, I'm interested in what empirical evidence do you have? What do you have other than speculation that the jury was motivated by fear?
Thank you.
The court conducted no voir dire. They didn't ask the jurors what their feelings were. They assumed. What is there to anchor this idea that somehow there would have been, there must have been a riot had the trial?
Thank you. Mr. Torres.
Well, I think just the history, the fact that this has happened in the past, and perhaps the jury didn't want the same thing to happen again. We've had an unfortunate history of riots after acquittal of policemen for whatever reason, and I think it would be a fairly accurate perception on the part of the jury that if they were to acquit this policeman, the same thing might happen. Because
Monsignor
history
Walsh.
would have been on the side of that conclusion.
I would point out that the only real riot that we had after the acquittal of policemen was when the trial was held in Tampa. What happened after the other acquittal was very, very little. Worst has happened in small towns in Georgia after football games.
So you're talking,
So
you're saying
in
this
other
was a
words,
media...
the community was prepared for it, the community handled it, the police handled it in the Alvarez trial and the others, and I think there's a very important distinction there.
Okay. Sir.
Yeah, and I just think Lozano is symptomatic of a greater evil in the United States, is that whenever a police does something to a black person, it seems that none of them are ever convicted. If they are convicted, it is overturned. And that's what the perception, whether real or perceived. But that is what's happening. We have to believe that we're not going to get a fair trial in any case. And that's why they riot, I believe.
Okay. Whose fault is that exactly, though? Does this mean that we blame others? I believe you had an opinion that you wanted to express about your feelings as a Floridian.
Well, I think I had pointed out that I think we are all minorities in Miami at this point. And I think we've got to remember this and try to embellish our community relations. And I do believe education is one way to do this and to inform people. One thing I do not understand is why, when these riots come, the black people, and I don't mean this unkindly, but they riot their own areas. They burn their own job places, and this is very confusing to me.
Okay, who can explain that dynamic?
Okay, I like to explain.
I'll take the mic.
I'm
sir.
sorry.
Thank you. That's fine.
I was part of that group of black civil rights leaders back in 1980 that ventilated our feelings and utterances about what we perceived to be an unfair trial of McDuffie. But what happened, that feeling transmitted to the underclass, the people who had no stake in the community, who expressed their feelings through violence. So I think it's important in 1993 that we that hold responsible position not to be concerned about Lozano, because Lozano is not the real issue. The issue are the problems that cause the conflict within us, within our community. And let's begin to work on those kind of issues and concerns, and that way we can lower the stress level of the underclass who would otherwise react just because they see us comment on how unfair the trial is in Orlando. That's what I'm concerned about.
Okay, who can speak to the concerns of the Colombian community? Is there anyone in our audience that can speak to the concerns of the Colombian community?
Well, as the wife of a Colombian, I have seen in many ways how Colombians are very often discriminated against in Miami. And it does seem odd to me that in this particular case, the one officer that will probably suffer the most is going to be Colombian.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that perhaps it's just an easy target. I certainly know how they've suffered.
Okay, Rabbi Schiff, let's talk about the victimization that people are feeling on both sides of this issue. How have you been dealing with that on a spiritual level?
I didn't hear the question.
How have you been dealing with the victimization that folks are feeling both on the Latin and black side of this issue?
Well, there are a few things to keep in mind. One was mentioned earlier. I want to elaborate on that. And that is when people have no vested interest in a community. They have nothing to lose. It's much easier to incite them to burn and to riot. They have nothing to lose. What we have to do on that, to correct that, is to try to build a community with sensitivity for those that have not, and to make them more part of the community of haves. And that is that when people have things and when their job levels are taken care of, their economic conditions are raised, then they would have less reason to burn. The other thing is to create a sense of sensitivity on behalf of law enforcement officers, to know what they're dealing with, so that people can understand the sensitivities of other racial and ethnic groups, so they can relate to them in a better way.
Minister Ray Fauntleroy?
Yeah, I just hope that we're not losing sight on the issue here. The issue is justice. The issue is, in the McDuffie case, for example, 4 officers were charged with beating Arthur McDuffie to death in handcuffs, and they were acquitted. In the Lozano case, Mr. Lozano was tried and convicted of shooting Clement Lloyd and Alan Blanchard. Without knowing what they had done, he pulled his weapon and fired. That is a violation of the police methods, and it is a violation of the law. And
What about those, Minister, what about those that say that Lozano is doing his job? What about the police department? How are they going to deal with the terror that goes on every time they go out to do their job?
a traffic violation is not a crime to be killed for. In that incident, he was speeding, and Mr. Lozano did not know or had no cause to kill him or to draw his weapon and fire. And that is what we've got to keep the attention. It's not whether or not the community is going to riot. Riots